have lived my whole life in these mountains. I have learned that certain stories, certain warnings, certain rules exist because people paid in blood to discover them. What follows are 10 testimonies from deep within Appalachia. These are not tales told for entertainment. These are lessons. These are warnings. These are the truths we pass down so that others might live. Story 1. The Holler that swallowed the sun. My name is Michael, and I have lived my entire life in a place that does not follow the rules of the rest of the world. I was born here, in Raven Holler, deep in the mountains, where 3 ridges meet, and the valley floor sits lower than anywhere else in the county. Most people do not know Raven Holler exists. That is by design. That is the only thing that keeps us alive. Before I explain what happened, you need to understand how light moves in the Holler. The mountains here are steep. They rise up nearly vertical on all sides. The valley floor is never truly bright, even in summer. By October, the sun only touches the Holler for about 4 hours a day, from roughly 9 in the morning until 1 in the afternoon. By November, that window shrinks to 2 hours. By the winter solstice, the sun barely clears the ridge. We have learned to live with this darkness. We have built our lives around it. Our gardens are shade crops. Our livestock are creatures adapted to dim light. We work by lamplight for most of the year. This is normal for us. This is how we survive. The problem began on December 21st of the year I turned 17. The winter solstice. The day the sun reaches its lowest point in the sky. That morning, I remember my mother waking me before dawn, telling me to go fetch water from the spring before the sun came up. She always said this on the solstice. Get the water while the world is dark. Use it for the new year ahead. I never questioned it. I simply did as I was told. I walked down to the spring in the pre-dawn darkness, carrying the wooden bucket my great-grandfather had carved. The path is narrow and steep. It winds down through hemlocks and rhododendron, following the creek that runs year-round. The rocks are slick with ice this time of year. I moved carefully. The spring sits at the lowest point of the Holler, where 3 streams meet. It is always cold there, even in summer. On that morning, it was bitterly cold. The water was clear and cold, and tasted faintly of minerals. I filled the bucket. I remember the sound of the water filling the wood. I remember the smell of hemlock and frozen earth. I remember looking up through the trees and seeing the stars beginning to fade. Dawn was coming. I had stayed long enough. I turned to go. That is when I noticed something was wrong with the light. I climbed back up the path toward home. The sky should have been growing lighter. The stars should have been fading to nothing. The eastern horizon should have been turning pink, then red, then gold. But the sky stayed the same darkness it had been at 4 in the morning. Not lighter, just the same. I climbed faster. My bucket sloshed water on my legs. I was not thinking clearly. I knew something was wrong, but I could not name it. When I reached the top of the path, I could see our house. My father was already in the yard, working on the fence. He should not have been working in the dark. He had a lantern, and that seemed wrong. Very wrong. I remember running toward him and asking him what time it was. He looked at me as if I had asked him something in a language he did not understand. He told me it was nearly 7 in the morning, but it was still night. The sky above was black, not dark blue, not twilight, black. The stars still shone overhead. The air was cold and still. There was no wind. There was no sound except for his voice and my breathing. My father set down his hammer and looked at me. I saw fear in his eyes. I had never seen that before. My father was a man who did not fear. He told me to go inside. He told me to tell my mother to gather everyone. He told me to bring the old books from the shelf in the kitchen. The red leather books with no titles. The ones we were never supposed to touch. I did as he said. I did not ask questions. I moved through a house lit by lanterns and oil lamps, and I knew without words that something fundamental had changed. Within an hour, everyone in the Holler had gathered at my family's house. That is 47 people. We are not a large community. We know one another. We see one another almost every day. But I had never seen us all in one place in the darkness. It was unsettling. Everyone kept looking toward the windows, as if the sun might still appear, as if this darkness might be temporary. My grandfather was the oldest of us. He was 93 years old. He stood in our kitchen and opened the first of the red leather books. His hands shook. He told us that this was the one day we had all hoped would never come. He told us that what he was about to read was the reason our ancestors had settled in this particular holler, in this valley that would never be rich, that could not be easily reached, that had no good reason to be home. The book was written in careful handwriting. The ink was faded. The dates at the top of the pages went back 237 years. The first entry was dated the winter solstice of the year 1786. The handwriting was different then, older and more careful. It described a day exactly like the one we were experiencing. A day when the sun did not rise. A day when the sky went black at dawn and remained black. According to the book, that day in 1786 had lasted for 439 days. My grandfather read to us from the book. He told us the story of our first ancestor to reach this place, a man named Jeremiah, who had fled from the settlements to the south. Jeremiah had been running from the law. He had killed a man in a dispute over land. Rather than face the rope, he had run north into the mountains, into places where no one could reach him. He had found the Holler by accident, wandering lost through a winter storm. The valley had seemed to him like a sanctuary, hidden, protected. He had built a cabin and prepared to survive the winter alone. But on the solstice of that year, the sun had not risen. Jeremiah had thought he was losing his mind. He had climbed to the ridge top, thinking the darkness was an effect of the holler itself. But from the high ground, he could see that the darkness covered everything. The entire sky was black, not even twilight, not even the darkness of night, a darkness that seemed to have weight and substance. According to the book, Jeremiah had wandered the ridge for hours, trying to find a way out of the darkness. But the darkness was not localized to the holler. It had expanded with him. It had followed him. No matter how far he walked, the darkness remained absolute. When Jeremiah had finally returned to his cabin and waited, he discovered that the darkness did not diminish. Hours passed. His lanterns burned low. He was terrified. He had nowhere else to go. He could not survive in a wilderness of absolute darkness. On the third day of the darkness, Jeremiah found something. In his cabin, there was a sound, a voice. It came from everywhere and nowhere. It was not a voice he heard with his ears. It was a voice he heard in his mind. It spoke to him of a bargain. It told him that the darkness could be lifted, that the sun could return, that he could live in the holler in light, just as he was living now in darkness. But the bargain would require a price. The voice told Jeremiah that this darkness was not natural. It was not an eclipse. It was not a storm. It was a thing that lived in the deep places of the earth, a thing that had been stirred by something that Jeremiah had done, the killing of the man. The blood spilled in violence. The darkness had been drawn to it, drawn to the echo of murder in the mountains. The voice said that it could return the sun. But for every day of darkness, for every revolution of the earth without light, Jeremiah would owe something in return. He would owe it blood. Once every year, on the winter solstice, for as long as his line lived in the holler, the darkness would return. And someone would have to go into that darkness, and something would have to be given, and only then would the sun return. Jeremiah had agreed to this bargain. He had not written down what he gave. The oldest parts of the book are vague about this, but the darkness lifted. The sun came back, and Jeremiah stayed in the holler. From that year forward, the holler has lived with this knowledge. Every winter solstice, the sun does not rise. The darkness comes. It lasts for hours or days or weeks, depending on what is required. And someone goes into the darkness, and something is exchanged, and the light returns. My grandfather told us that in all the years this had happened, all the years since 1786, the bargain had been honored. A member of our community had gone into the darkness. Some of them had returned, some had not, but always the sun had come back. He told us that the books recorded every solstice, every darkness, every price that had been paid. He flipped through the pages and showed us the notations, single words next to dates, names sometimes, or descriptions. The oldest entries were sparse. More recently, the notations had become more detailed. A man had gone in 1823 and returned having aged 40 years in a day. A woman had gone in 1915 and come back speaking a language that no longer existed. A girl had gone in 1967 and come back as someone else entirely. The book did not explain what someone else entirely meant, but the handwriting of the person who wrote it was shaky. My grandfather told us that it was now clear why the darkness had come today. It was the solstice. The darkness came every solstice now. The bargain had become cyclical. Every year, the sun would not rise, and every year, someone would need to go into the darkness and fulfill the requirement of the bargain. He told us that the book contained a list of who had gone in the years since. The last entry was from 5 years ago. My grandfather's sister had gone into the darkness. She had returned, but she had not spoken since. She lived in a cottage on the edge of the Holler. She did not come to gatherings. She stared at things that no one else could see. My grandfather told us that according to the oldest sections of the book, the person who goes into the darkness should be a volunteer. The bargain was made by willing blood. It requires willing sacrifice. He asked us, standing there in the lamplight, who would go. No one spoke. We stood in the yellow light of the oil lamps, and no one spoke. My grandfather waited. His hands trembled. His eyes moved around the room, looking at each of us in turn. He waited for someone to step forward, but no one did. My father spoke first. He said that the records showed that when a volunteer did not come forward, the darkness took someone. He said that this was the danger. The bargain would be fulfilled. The darkness would claim someone, willing or not, and we would lose someone to whatever lived in that darkness. He said that it was better to volunteer. It was better to go forward and meet whatever demanded to be met. My mother took my hand. She held it very tightly. My grandfather asked again, who would go into the darkness and fulfill the bargain? I stepped forward. I am not sure why I did this. I have thought about it every day since. I have tried to understand the reasoning, the impulse that moved me forward. I have convinced myself that I was being brave. I have convinced myself that I was trying to protect my family. I have convinced myself that I was accepting what needed to be accepted. But the truth is simpler and worse. I was 17 years old. I was afraid. And I thought that if I volunteered, if I went into the darkness, before it could take someone I loved. Then I would be doing something noble. I was a child. I did not understand what I was saying yes to. My grandfather read the instructions from the book. He told me that I should go to the center of the holler at the moment of noon, by the old oak tree that marks the lowest point of the valley. He told me that I should wear nothing but white cloth. He told me that I should carry a lantern, though it would not help me see. He told me that I should walk into the darkness and keep walking until I reached something. He did not say what something was. The book did not specify. He simply said that I would know when I reached it. He told me that the darkness would not be empty. He told me that I might see things or hear things. He told me that these things might try to speak to me. He told me that I should not listen. I should not answer. I should not stop walking. He told me that after I had reached what I needed to reach, the sun would return, and I could come home. He told me this as if it was a simple instruction, as if I was being asked to fetch water or chop wood. The darkness held for 4 hours. That is important. That is not as long as the first darkness in 1786. That is not as long as many of the darknesses recorded in the book. 4 hours is short. I have read the book many times since. I have learned what different lengths of darkness mean. 4 hours means the price being demanded was not very high. 4 hours means I was lucky. I walked into the darkness at noon. The lantern in my hand provided no light. The flame burned in the lantern, but it seemed to cast light inward rather than outward, illuminating only the curve of the lamp itself. Everywhere else was complete darkness. I could not see my hand in front of my face. I could not see the ground beneath my feet. I had to feel my way forward. The darkness was cold. It was far colder than the winter air. It seemed to drain heat from me as I walked. Within minutes, I was shaking. Within 10 minutes, I could barely feel my feet. I walked for a long time. I did not know how long. Without light, without being able to see the sun or stars, without any reference point, time became meaningless. I could have been walking for 10 minutes or 2 hours. I was disoriented. I was terrified. I kept expecting to step off a cliff or into a crevasse. I moved forward one careful step at a time. I began to hear sounds. At first, they were subtle. Sounds like wind, like water, like things moving through the dark. But the sounds grew louder, more distinct. I heard what sounded like breathing. I heard what sounded like footsteps following me. I heard what sounded like voices calling my name. I did not stop. I did not look back. My grandfather had been clear about this. Do not listen. Do not answer. But the voices grew more insistent. They became the voices of people I knew. My mother calling my name. my father speaking my name with concern, my friends from school calling out to me. They sounded real. They sounded close. They sounded frightened and confused, calling for me to come help them, to stop wandering and come see what was wrong. I kept walking. The voices changed. They became the voices of people I did not recognize. People who had died before I was born. People I had read about in the old books. They were calling my name with longing and desperation. They were asking me to stop, to turn back, to go back, and tell their families they were sorry. I kept walking. The ground beneath my feet changed. Instead of the soft earth of the holler, I was walking on stone. The stone was smooth. It was not a natural cave or ravine. It was worked stone. It had been shaped. I was walking on something that had been built. The air changed too. It became warm. It became humid. It smelled like earth and minerals, and something else I could not identify. Something old. Something that had not seen air or light in a very long time. I heard water. I heard the sound of water moving, a stream or a river flowing somewhere beneath me. I moved toward the sound. I did not know what else to do, and then I stopped. I did not make a conscious decision to stop. My body simply stopped moving. I could not take another step. It was as if I had reached a boundary, a wall that existed but was not visible. The air in front of me was different, thicker, more substantial. I could feel it against my face like a curtain. A voice spoke to me. It came from everywhere and nowhere. It was the same voice that had spoken to Jeremiah all those years ago. It was not a voice I heard with my ears. It was a voice that formed directly in my mind, as if it was my own thoughts speaking back to me. It told me that I had paid the price. It told me that the darkness would now lift. It told me that I could return to my home. It told me that the sun would rise and the holler would have light again. It told me that I had done what was required. And then it told me something else. It told me that this bargain was not finished. It told me that the bargain could never be finished, not as long as my family lived in the holler. It told me that the darkness would come again next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. It told me that the darkness would come every winter solstice for as long as there was a sun to hide. I understood then what I had really agreed to. The light returned. It was sudden. One moment, I was in absolute darkness. The next moment, it was early morning, pale, gray. The sun was just clearing the ridge. It was weak light, the light of a winter solstice morning in a deep valley. But it was light. It was the sun. I was standing on the old oak tree at the center of the holler. I do not know how I got there. I have no memory of walking back. I have no memory of the path I took. I was simply there, standing on the flat stone beside the tree, and the sun was rising. My father was waiting for me. He had been waiting there all along, though I had not known. He was standing at a distance where the darkness did not reach. He helped me back to the house. I was nearly frozen. I was shaking so badly that I could not walk on my own. He wrapped me in blankets and held me while I shook. The book has not recorded my name in the years since. My grandfather told me that he did not know what to write. He did not know if I had been changed by what happened in the darkness. He said he would wait and see. He said he would watch me to see what the darkness had taken in exchange for the light. I am old now. I am the oldest person in the Holler except for one, and I have lived my life watching the darkness come and go. Every year on the solstice, I wake knowing that the sun will not rise. Every year, I watch the darkness fall. And every year, I think about that boundary, that place where the built stone ends and the rest of the darkness begins. I have learned things in the years since. I have read the rest of the books. I have understood that the Holler is built on top of something. There is a structure beneath us. There is a thing that lives deeper than anything we can reach. There is an intelligence in this place that predates our presence by centuries, maybe longer. And I have come to understand that the bargain was never what Jeremiah thought it was. The darkness did not come because of the blood he spilled. The darkness was always here. The bargain was simply recognition, acknowledgement. Jeremiah was not the first to be chosen by this thing. He was simply the first to survive long enough to make terms with it. I have lived my entire life in a place where daylight never returns after the winter solstice, not because of a curse, but because something beneath this valley prefers the dark, and we have learned to live with it. We have built our lives around it. We have learned that there is a price for everything, and the price for living here is that someone must go into the darkness once a year. I tell you this because you should know. If you ever drive through the mountains and see a valley that seems too deep, too dark, a place that the sun seems to avoid, you should drive past it. You should not stop. You should not try to help anyone you see there. You should understand that they have made a bargain, and that bargain has roots deeper than you can imagine. And if you see darkness in the middle of the day, if you see the sun fail to rise on a winter morning, you should remember that it is not an eclipse. You should remember that somewhere, in some deep place, something that is not human is being acknowledged. Something that was here before us is being recognized. And somewhere, someone is walking into that darkness to pay a price. That someone has chosen to walk into darkness so that the rest of us can have light. The least we can do is understand what that costs. Story 2. Skinwalker on Sourwood Ridge. My name is Thomas. I have been hunting in these mountains for 53 years. I know every ridge, every creek, every deer path, and bear den from the North Fork all the way down to where the land flattens out near the state line. I have spent more nights in these woods than I have spent in houses. I know the mountains better than I know people, but there is one place in these mountains where I will not hunt anymore. There is one ridge where I will not set foot. That ridge is Sourwood Ridge, and what I am about to tell you is why. It was 12 years ago. I was tracking an elk, a big bull. I had caught sight of it 3 days before, and I had spent the days since moving through the woods, trying to get ahead of it, trying to find a place where I could make a clean shot. Hunting at this level is not about violence. It is about patience. It is about understanding an animal well enough to predict where it will go. It is about respect. The elk had been moving towards Sourwood Ridge. I had followed. The weather had been turning. There was a storm coming in from the west. The wind was picking up. The light was failing. It was the end of October. The days are short. The sun sets early. I knew I should have stopped hunting and headed back to camp. I knew this. I had been hunting long enough to understand risk. I understood that a man alone in these mountains after dark is a man putting himself in danger. But I was close to the elk. I was maybe an hour behind it. I thought I could catch up, make my shot, field dress the animal, and head back to camp by full dark. It would be tight. It would not be safe. But I thought I could do it. I did not do it. The fog came first. Fog in the mountains is not unusual in October. The temperature drops as the sun sets. The water in the air condenses. You get clouds that settle into the valleys and wrap around the ridges. But this fog was different. It came up fast. One moment, I could see 50 yards ahead. The next moment, I could see 5. The fog was thick and cold, and it smelled wrong. There was a mineral smell to it, like metal and old stone. There was an animal smell to it too, but I could not identify it. It was not a smell I recognized. And there was something else. A smell like smoke. Old smoke. Smoke that had been burning a very long time. I stopped walking. I knew something was wrong. After 50 years of hunting, you develop an instinct for wrongness. You learn to notice when something is not as it should be. And this fog was not as it should be. I turned on my flashlight. The beam did not carry far. The fog was so thick that the light seemed to stop a few feet in front of me. It was like pointing the flashlight at a wall. The light did not pass through the fog. It did not reflect back. It was just absorbed. I turned the flashlight off. Moving through fog with a light was worse than moving through it blind. I would feel my way forward. I decided. I would move slow. I would be careful. The trees were disappearing, or not disappearing, becoming. The fog was so thick that I was running into trees without seeing them. I would put my hand out and find bark. I would touch a branch and discover the tree was there. The forest was becoming something tactile rather than something seen. I do not know how long I was walking in that fog. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe an hour, without being able to see anything, without being able to see the sky or the slope of the land. I had no reference point. I could have been walking in circles. I could have been walking in a straight line. I had no way to know. That was when I heard the voice. It was a woman's voice. It came from somewhere to my left. It was calling a name. It was saying the name over and over. The name was Robert. Robert, where are you? Robert, come back. Robert, can you hear me? I stopped moving. I stood very still. The voice came again. It sounded desperate. It sounded terrified. It sounded like a woman who had lost someone in this fog, and she was trying to find him before something happened to him. My first instinct was to answer. My first instinct was to walk toward the voice and tell her that I was there, that I could help her, that we could find her Robert together. But something stopped me. Something in the quality of the voice was wrong. It sounded real, but it also sounded like a recording, like something was reproducing the voice rather than producing it. The desperation sounded genuine, but also rehearsed. The fear sounded authentic, but also performed. I did not call out. I did not move toward the voice. The voice changed. It stopped calling for Robert. It started calling for me. It knew my name. It was calling Thomas. Thomas, it is cold. Thomas, help me. Thomas, I am lost. I looked toward where the voice was coming from, but I could not see anything. The fog was too thick. The darkness was too complete. The voice came again. It was not coming from one direction now. It was coming from all directions. It was all around me. Multiple voices. Different voices. They were calling different names. They were calling the names of people I know. My sister, my hunting partner, my ex-wife. They were all calling my name. They were all saying that they were lost, that they needed help, that I should come to them. I backed away. I could not see where I was backing toward, but I moved away from the voices. I moved away from all of them. The voices did not chase me. They did not change position. They stayed around me, surrounding me, calling my name and the names of people I loved. I was breathing heavily. I was frightened in a way that I had not been frightened since I was a child. I knew what hunting danger was. I knew how to handle myself when a bear was nearby or when I was caught in a sudden storm. But this was different. This was not a natural danger. This was something that did not follow the rules of the natural world. The voices stopped. The fog lifted slightly, not much, but enough that I could see a few more yards ahead. I could see the shape of a building, a cabin maybe, an old structure. It had a roof, though the roof was partially collapsed. The walls looked like they were made of stone or rough wood. It was hard to tell in the fog and darkness. The voices started again. They were coming from inside the cabin. They were calling to me from inside. They wanted me to come in. They said it was warm inside. They said it was safe. They said they were all waiting for me. I ran. I turned away from the cabin and I ran. I ran through the fog without being able to see. I ran into trees and branches. I ran until I did not know where I was. I ran until I was so exhausted that I could not run anymore. I collapsed against a tree. I sat down in the dirt and the leaf litter, and I tried to breathe. My heart was pounding. My hands were shaking. I was terrified. That is when I saw the eyes. There was a face in the fog. It was only a few feet away from me. I could see the eyes and the outline of a face, and nothing else. The rest of the face was obscured by the fog, but the eyes were clear. They were looking at me. They were not human eyes. They were wrong. The pupils were wrong. The shape of the eyes was wrong. The color was wrong. I had looked into the eyes of many animals in my life. I had looked into the eyes of deer and bear and mountain lions. I had seen intelligence in those eyes. I had seen fear and hunger and curiosity. But I had never seen eyes like these. These eyes contained something that was almost human, but not quite. Something that was almost animal, but not quite. Something that was in between, and the in between was the wrongness. The face moved. The fog shifted, and I could see more of it. I could see that the face was wearing features that did not match each other. The jaw was too wide. The cheekbones were too high. The nose was broken and healed incorrectly. The face was covered in skin that looked like it had been stretched over bone. It was a face made from the pieces of other faces, assembled incorrectly, and I recognized part of that face. I recognized my brother's nose. I recognized my ex-wife's chin. I recognized my hunting partner's scar above the left eye. The face was assembled from the faces of people I knew. It was wearing them like a mask, but the mask was made from actual flesh. I screamed. I do not remember standing up, but I was standing. I was running. I was crashing through the forest, away from that thing, away from that face that was made from the faces of people I loved. Behind me, I could hear movement. Not footsteps. Not the movement of something that was running. It was a different kind of movement. It sounded like something was sliding through the underbrush, like something was moving in a way that was almost wrong. Almost, but not quite natural. I ran for a long time. The fog was getting thinner. I could see better. I could see the trees. I could see the ground beneath my feet. I could see the sky beginning to clear. The moon was coming out. The fog was breaking up. I ran until I broke through the tree line, and I found myself on a ridge. I could see the lights of a house below me, a cabin, a home. I did not care whose home it was. I ran toward the lights. I burst through the door of that cabin, and I was breathing so hard that I could barely speak. The people inside were terrified. They thought I was a wild animal. They thought I was a madman. There was an old man and an old woman. There was a hunter's rifle leaning against the wall. The old man grabbed it. I put my hands up. I was not a threat. I was just a man who had seen something in the fog. He did not shoot. He lowered the rifle and told me to sit down. His name was Robert. His wife's name was Sarah. They had been hunting in the area as well. They had come back to the cabin when the fog rolled in. They had decided to wait it out. I did not tell them what I had seen. Not at first. I just sat by their fire and tried to stop shaking. After I had calmed down somewhat, after I had drunk some coffee and felt more like a human being, the old man asked me what had happened. He asked what I had been running from. I told him I had seen a bear, a big bear. It had charged at me, and I had run. He knew I was lying. I could see it in his face. But he did not push the issue. He simply nodded and told me that bears were unusual in this area. He told me that I was lucky to have escaped. That is when his wife said something that made my blood cold. She said that there had been something in the fog on Sourwood Ridge for a long time. She said that hunters avoided this area for a reason. She said that sometimes hikers or hunters would go into the fog and they would come back changed. I asked her what she meant by changed. She did not answer directly. She asked me if I had heard voices in the fog. She asked me if I had seen a building. She asked me if I had looked into the face of something that wore the faces of people I knew. I asked her how she knew these things. She told me that her son had gone into that fog 15 years ago. He had come back, but he was not the same person anymore. His memories were wrong. He knew things he should not have known. He spoke about people he had never met as if he knew them. And sometimes, when the fog came, he would disappear. He would go back into it. And when he came back, he would tell her that he had seen more faces, that the thing was learning, that it was building. I left that cabin and I drove back to my camp. I packed my truck. I left the elk. I did not go back to Sourwood Ridge. In the 12 years since, I have learned things. I have talked to other hunters. I have heard stories. There is a pattern. People who go into that fog often come back, but they come back wrong. Their loved ones say they speak with voices that are not quite right. They say they see people who are not there. They say they lose time. They say that the person who came back is not quite the person who left. I have heard that the thing in the fog is a collector, that it is gathering faces, that it is studying the people who live in these mountains, learning their features, their voices, their ways of moving. Some say it has been doing this for hundreds of years. Some say it plans to leave the fog eventually, to become one of us completely, to walk among people and be indistinguishable. I do not hunt on Sourwood Ridge anymore, and I have told this story to every hunter I know, because you should understand. If you are hiking in these mountains and you see fog that seems too thick, fog that seems to move in ways that fog should not move, you should turn back. You should go a different way. And if you hear voices in that fog, if you hear the voices of people you love calling out to you, if you see a building that seems to be waiting for you, you should run. You should not look at the face in the fog. You should not try to help the people who are calling to you, because the thing in that fog is not trying to hurt you. It is trying to become you. And that is a worse fate than death. Story 3, where the laurel won't grow. My name is Catherine, and I have lived in these mountains my entire life. I have raised 5 children here. I have planted gardens and tended to animals and built a life in a place where my family has lived for more than 200 years. I know these mountains. I know the land. I know the soil and the water and the air. There is a place on the side of Black Mountain where nothing grows. Not nothing exactly. Bushes grow. Briars grow. Certain kinds of grass grow. But the laurel will not grow there. The rhododendron will not grow there. The hardwood trees will not grow there. The soft earth and the good soil where plants thrive will not maintain themselves there. My grandmother told me this when I was a girl. She told me that there was a place on Black Mountain where the ground was wrong. She told me never to dig there. She told me never to sleep there. She told me never to stay there after dark. She gave me these warnings as if they were simple rules, like not running in the house or not speaking to strangers. I never understood why these warnings were necessary until I was old enough to want to know the story behind them. There is a path up Black Mountain that most people use. It goes up the east side of the ridge, where the slope is gentle and the way is clear. But there is another path, an older path. It goes up the west side, where the slope is steep and the forest is thick. My great-great-grandfather had marked that path. He had cut blazes into the trees. The blazes are still there, though they are old and weathered. I followed that path when I was 16 years old, trying to prove something to myself. I was trying to prove that I was braver than the stories. I was trying to prove that the warnings were superstition. I was trying to prove that I was not afraid. I hiked up that old path on a day in late May. The weather was clear. The sun was shining. The birds were singing. It was a beautiful day, and I was young enough to think that beauty meant safety. The path climbed steadily. I followed the old blazes. They were easy to spot if you knew what you were looking for. After about an hour of hiking, the path reached a place where the forest opened up. The trees were thinner here. The canopy was broken. Sunlight poured down in shafts, and there was the bare place. It was obvious once you saw it. The ground in this section of the mountain was a different color. It was gray and brown like ash, like the soil had been burned. There was no humus layer. There were no leaves rotting into the earth. The ground was hard and compacted, and there were no laurels. The laurels were everywhere on that mountain, except for this place. They were in the understory all around. But in this particular clearing, in this specific place, there were no laurels. There were no rhododendrons either. There were no beautiful mountain plants. There was only dry, sparse vegetation. Briars, tough grass, lichens on the rocks. In the center of the clearing, there was a depression in the ground. It was roughly circular, maybe 30 feet across. It looked like the place had been dug out, or melted down, or collapsed inward. The edges of the depression were irregular and broken. Rocks of different sizes jutted up from the dirt. I walked toward the depression. I was curious, and I was 16, and I did not have the sense to be afraid. As soon as I stepped from the healthy forest floor to the gray soil of the clearing, the temperature dropped. It was noticeable. It was like stepping from a warm room into a cold one. I stopped, thinking perhaps a cloud had passed in front of the sun. But when I looked up, the sun was still shining. The warmth had simply stopped at the edge of the clearing. I walked toward the depression. The ground beneath my feet was different here. It was not just dry. It was almost crystalline. My footsteps made crunching sounds. It sounded like I was walking on something that was not quite earth. When I reached the edge of the depression, I looked down into it. The bottom was maybe 15 feet down. The sides were steep, and at the bottom there were bones. They were not bones from any animal I recognized. They were too large for that. They looked almost human, but the proportions were wrong. The leg bones were bent in ways that legs should not bend. The spine was curved too far. The rib cage was too wide. The skull, from what I could see of it, had eye sockets that were too close together. There were many sets of bones, multiple bodies, or multiple things that were not quite bodies. They were scattered at the bottom of the depression, tangled together, as if they had fallen in, or been thrown in, or crawled in and died. I do not know what made me do what I did next. I do not know what impulse made me reach down and pick up a piece of bone from the ground near my feet. But I did. I picked it up. It was warm. That is what I remember most clearly. The bone was warm, as if something warm was very close, or the ground itself held some heat that I could not feel with my feet. The world went away. I was not in the clearing anymore. I was not on the mountain anymore. I was in a place that was not a place. There was no up or down. There was no light or darkness exactly. There was just a gray space that extended in all directions or no directions. I could not tell. I was not alone in this space. There were things with me. I could not see them exactly. I could see the space around them, the way the gray air seemed to curve toward them, but I could not see the things themselves. I could feel them, though. I could feel their presence. I could feel their attention on me. One of the things moved closer. I still could not see it, but I could feel it moving toward me. The air changed around me. It became colder. It became heavy. It was like something was displacing the air with its presence. It communicated with me, not with words, not with sounds. It communicated directly into my mind. It told me things. It told me that I should not be here. It told me that I was not supposed to see this place. It told me that I had taken something from the ground that did not belong to me. I was terrified. I was more frightened than I had ever been. The terror was complete and absolute. It was terror without object or reason. It was pure fear, and it was suffocating. And then I was back in the clearing. I was on my knees. My hands were in the gray earth. I was gasping for breath. The bone that I had picked up was no longer in my hand. I did not know what had happened to it. I ran. I did not think. I did not consider the path or the terrain. I simply ran down the mountain. I crashed through the forest. I fell down the slope. I scraped myself bloody. I did not stop. I ran until I reached the bottom of the mountain and the road and the place where people were. When I reached home, my mother was horrified. I was bleeding and bruised, and I could not explain what had happened. I could barely speak. My tongue felt wrong in my mouth. The words would not come out correctly. I tried to tell her that I had fallen. I tried to tell her that I had had a bad experience on the mountain, but I could not tell her the truth because I did not understand the truth. I did not understand what had happened in that gray space. For 3 days after that, I was ill. I had a high fever. I was delirious. My mother called the doctor, but he could not find anything wrong with me. He said I had some kind of flu, that I needed rest and fluids, that I would recover in time. On the 4th day, the fever broke. I woke up clear-headed, but something had changed. I could see things that had not been visible to me before. I could see the thin places, the places where the world was not as solid as it should be, the places where something else was pressing against the edge of what we know, trying to get through. There was one in my bedroom, in the corner near the window. There was a thinning, a place where the air was slightly different, slightly less substantial. My grandmother came to see me that day. She looked at me, and she knew immediately what had happened. She knew that I had gone to the place on Black Mountain. She knew that I had seen something that changed me. She sat on my bed, and she took my hand, and she told me the story. A long time ago, in the early days of settlement in these mountains, a group of people had moved into what is now these mountains. They were not like the other settlers. They were fleeing something, running from persecution. She did not tell me what they were fleeing from, or what they believed in, or what they were trying to build. She simply said that they were not like the people who came before or after them. They had chosen to settle on Black Mountain, specifically on the western slope. They had cut down the laurels. They had built a structure. My grandmother would not tell me what kind of structure it was, or what they used it for, or what they did inside of it. But she said that they had made a place on that mountain that was not a natural place. They had made a place where the normal rules did not apply. The authorities had come eventually. The outside world had found out about the group, about what they were doing, about whatever was happening on Black Mountain. There had been a confrontation. There had been violence. The structure had been burned. The people had been scattered or killed. The authorities had tried to remove all evidence of what had happened, but they could not. The place remained. The depression in the ground remained. The bones remained, and the laurels would not grow there anymore. The rhododendrons would not grow there. The mountain had been marked. Something had happened there that had changed the land itself, and the thing that had been in that place, the thing that the group had been in contact with, was still there. It was in the ground. It was in the thin places. It was waiting. My grandmother told me that I had woken it up. That by taking the bone, by touching something that was connected to it, I had let it know that I was there. And now it would be aware of me. It would watch me. It would wait for me. She told me that the warnings were not superstition. The warnings were lessons learned in blood. The stories told about the place were documentation of what happened when someone broke the rules. She told me that people who did what I had done sometimes did not recover. Sometimes they became ill and they died. Sometimes they survived, but they were changed. They could see the thin places. They could sense when something was not right with the world. They developed what some people called the sight, or the second sight. They could perceive things that others could not perceive. I asked her if that was what had happened to me. She told me that I would have to wait and see. She told me that some people adapted to this sight. Some people learned to live with it. Others did not. Others became mad. Others took their own lives, unable to bear knowing what was really beneath the surface of the world. I am 73 years old now. I have lived with the sight for 57 years, and I can tell you that my grandmother was correct in almost everything she said. I can see the thin places. I can sense when something is not right with the world. I can feel when the boundaries between our world and the other places are becoming weak. And I know things that I should not know. I know when someone is going to die. I know when a child is going to be born. I know when a stranger is coming to the mountains. I know things because I can see through to a level of reality that most people do not perceive. It is not a gift. It is not a curse exactly, but it is not a gift. It is a burden. It is a responsibility. You cannot know these things and not act on them. You cannot see these thin places and not try to protect people from them. The place on Black Mountain still calls to me. Every year on the anniversary of the day I went there, I feel it. I feel it pulling at me, trying to draw me back. And every year, I have to fight that pull. I have to stay away. I have to remember what I felt in that gray space, and I have to stay away. I will not tell you what I learned in that gray space. I will not tell you the things that were communicated to me, because to say those things out loud is to give them power. To speak them into existence is to let them spread into the world. Some knowledge should not be shared. Some things should not be said. But I will tell you this: the warnings are real. The place on Black Mountain is a wound in the world. Something that should not exist exists there. And if you ever see a place in nature where things refuse to grow, where the land itself seems wrong, where the air feels different and the temperature drops without cause, you should never, ever touch it. Because if you do, the things on the other side will know that you are there. And you will spend the rest of your life feeling them, watching you. Story 4. The Granny Woman's Last Cure. My name is James, and I am a doctor. I have been a doctor for 37 years. I have studied medicine at a major university. I have worked in hospitals and clinics. I understand the body. I understand disease. I understand what science can explain and what it cannot. But there is one person who could do things that I cannot do. And that person lived in a cabin 6 miles from where I live now. Her name was Maggie, and she was a granny woman, a healer, the kind of person that mountain communities relied on before there were hospitals and modern medicine. My wife had known Maggie her whole life. Maggie had delivered 3 of our 4 children. Maggie had treated my son when he broke his arm in a place where a hospital was 4 hours away. Maggie had prepared herbs and tinctures and poultices that had helped my wife through illnesses that doctors could not diagnose. I was skeptical of Maggie. I was a man of science. I did not believe in herbal remedies as a primary form of treatment. But I could not deny that Maggie achieved results that seemed to defy explanation. Maggie was old when I first met her. She was already in her 70s when my wife was a child. As the years passed, she did not seem to age in the normal way. She remained active. She remained mentally sharp. She remained powerful. And then, about 10 years ago, Maggie started to change. My wife noticed it first. She said that Maggie's remedies were becoming stronger, more potent. She said that a single dose of one of Maggie's teas would have effects that previously required multiple doses. She said that people were being healed more quickly, more completely than before. I was pleased with this change. As a doctor, I was pleased that people in our community were recovering from illness faster. But my wife was worried. She said that she could not figure out what Maggie was using in her remedies. She said that Maggie would not tell her the ingredients anymore. For years, my wife had been learning Maggie's craft. Maggie had been teaching her which plants to use, how to prepare them, how to know when someone needed which remedy. But this teaching had stopped. Maggie had become secretive about her work. One day, my wife asked Maggie directly. She asked what Maggie was using that was making her remedies so much more powerful. Maggie told her the truth, my wife said later. Maggie told her that the remedies were no longer based on plants alone. Maggie told her that she had found something more effective, something that worked faster and more completely than any herb or flower could work. My wife asked her what she was using. Maggie would not say, but my wife noticed things. She noticed that Maggie's cabin was different. There were new structures behind the cabin. There was a shed that had been built with thick wooden walls and a heavy lock. There was a garden that had been planted with plants that my wife did not recognize. And there was a smell that came from the back of the cabin sometimes, especially on still evenings. It was a smell that was not plant or animal. It was a chemical smell. It was acrid and sharp, and it made your nose hurt. Years passed. Maggie's remedies became more famous. People started to travel to see her from farther away. People from the next county over. People from towns. People who were sick and desperate and who would try anything to be well. And they were healed. The evidence was undeniable. People would come to Maggie's cabin sick with diseases that medical science had deemed incurable. Within weeks, sometimes days, they would be well. The healings were remarkable. They were remarkable enough to make me, as a doctor, question my own training. And then people started to disappear. It started with a transient, a man who had been traveling through looking for work. He had been sick with something the hospitals could not diagnose. He had made his way to Maggie's cabin. He had been there for 3 days, and then he was gone. No one knew where he had gone. He had simply left, moving on to the next town, presumably. Then a young woman disappeared. A girl who was 17 years old. She had epilepsy. It was severe. She had seizures multiple times a day. Her parents had been desperate. They had heard about Maggie. They had brought their daughter to the cabin. Within 2 weeks, the seizures had stopped. The girl was healed, but then she did not return home. When her parents came to collect her, Maggie said she had left. The girl had wanted to stay in the mountains. She had wanted to work for Maggie to learn the craft of healing. But when my wife went to visit Maggie, looking for the girl, because the girl's mother was desperately worried, Maggie's cabin was locked. A note was pinned to the door, saying that Maggie had gone away for a few weeks and would return in due time. When Maggie came back, the girl was not with her. My wife asked Maggie where the girl had gone. Maggie smiled and said that some people decide that their lives need to be different. Some people choose a different path. The girl had made her choice, and Maggie respected that choice. My wife did not believe her, but she could not prove otherwise. Over the following 2 years, 6 more people disappeared after coming to Maggie's cabin for healing. They were all people who had no family nearby. They were all people whose disappearance would not raise alarms in the larger world. They were all people who could disappear, and no one would ask questions. I wanted to investigate. I wanted to go to the authorities, but my wife asked me not to. She was frightened. She was frightened of Maggie. She was frightened that if I went to the authorities, if I accused Maggie of something, that Maggie might do something to our family in return. And I realized that I was frightened too. We stopped going to see Maggie. We stopped accepting her help. We started going to hospitals in the larger towns for medical care. Life continued. Time passed, but my wife could not stop thinking about what had happened. She could not stop being bothered by what Maggie was doing. And she was becoming curious about what Maggie was actually using in her remedies. One night, my wife told me that she was going to go to Maggie's cabin. She was going to look at the shed behind the cabin. She was going to find out what Maggie was actually doing. I told her not to go. I told her it was dangerous. I told her that we did not want to know, but she went anyway. She went in the evening in the twilight, when Maggie would be occupied with her other tasks. She went to the shed with a heavy lock, and she picked the lock This surprised me. My wife is not someone who would normally pick locks, but she was determined. What she found inside the shed, she told me only in pieces. She was traumatized by what she had seen. She would only tell me part of it at a time. And I am going to tell you what she told me, which is not the complete truth, because some of what was in that shed was too terrible for words. There were containers, large metal containers. In those containers, there were things that had been preserved, things that had been kept alive, or as close to alive as things could be kept without being fully alive. They were not human. They were not animals. They were something else. My wife described them as being somewhere between plant and animal. She said they had the appearance of roots, but also the appearance of veins. She said they seemed to have a circulatory system, but the system was filled with something that was not blood. It was something darker, something that moved more slowly. She said that the containers were filled with a liquid, and the roots or veins or whatever they were floated in that liquid, and they seemed to be growing. They seemed to be increasing in size. There were papers on a table in the shed, notes written in Maggie's handwriting, notes about experiments, notes about effectiveness, notes about the time it took for the remedy to work, notes about the side effects, which my wife said seemed to be mostly mental. The people who took the remedy experienced visions, hallucinations, a loss of sense of self, a merging of identity with something else. And there were notes about the people who had disappeared. The papers listed them by name. It listed the dates they had arrived at the cabin. It listed the dates they had stopped being people. The papers indicated that Maggie had a theory about what happened. The papers indicated that Maggie believed that the remedy was alive, in a way, that it was a sentient thing, that when people took enough of the remedy, when they were healed enough, the remedy would then consume them. It would integrate them. The missing people were not dead. They were part of something else now. They had been incorporated into the organisms that Maggie was growing in the shed. My wife left the shed. She locked it back up. She came home, and she did not speak to me for 3 days. When she finally did speak to me, she said that she was going to go to the authorities. She said that she could not let Maggie continue doing this. She said that more people would be hurt if she did not say anything. I begged her not to. I was afraid. I was afraid that Maggie would do something to us. I was afraid that we would be harmed in some way if we interfered with what Maggie was doing. But my wife was braver than I was. She went to the sheriff. She told him what she had found. The sheriff did not believe her. He thought she was a woman who had had a personal conflict with an elderly healer and was making accusations to damage her reputation. He went to Maggie's cabin to investigate. He looked at the shed, which was still locked. He asked Maggie for permission to open it. Maggie gave him the keys. The shed was empty. The containers were gone. The papers were gone. The table was empty. There was nothing there except for shelves and darkness. The sheriff asked Maggie where her equipment had gone. Maggie told him that she had always been a simple healer. She did not own equipment. She did not keep records. She had no idea what the sheriff was talking about. There was nothing to arrest her for. There was no evidence of any crime. My wife stopped speaking to me. She would look at me with such disappointment and such fear. She was afraid that I had warned Maggie. She was afraid that I had told Maggie what she was planning to do. I had not, but she did not believe me. A month after the sheriff's visit, Maggie came to our house. It was the middle of the day. My wife was out. I was alone. Maggie knocked on the door, and I let her in because I was too afraid to refuse. She told me that my wife had acted in error. She told me that she had been trying to do good work. She told me that the remedy was not evil, as my wife had suggested. The remedy was evolutionary. It was an improvement. It was a path to something better than human. She told me that I should not be afraid. She told me that she had no intention of harming our family. She told me that she had simply removed her work from the place where it could be found. She had moved her operation. She was continuing her work in a different location, in a place where she would not be disturbed. And then she gave me something. A small bottle. A tincture. She told me that it was a gift. She told me that if I ever felt sick, if I ever experienced pain, if I ever wanted to be healed of something that could not be healed by normal medicine, I should take a dose of the remedy. She told me that the remedy would work faster than any medical procedure. She told me that it would be more complete. She told me that I would be healed of anything that ailed me. And then she left. I still have that bottle. It sits on a shelf in my office. It is sealed with wax. The liquid inside is dark, and it seems to move even when the bottle is still. It has been there for 9 years. My wife does not know that I have kept it. She thinks I destroyed it. But I have kept it because I am curious. I am a man of science. I am curious about what something like that could contain. I am curious about whether Maggie's claims about the remedy were true. And sometimes, when I am tired, when I am sick, when I am in pain, I think about opening the bottle. I think about taking just a small dose. I think about what it would be like to be completely healed of every ailment. I think about what it would be like to experience that kind of power. My wife has left me. She could not forgive me for not warning Maggie away immediately. She could not forgive me for being a coward. She moved away 3 years ago. I have not heard from her since. I am older now. I am more tired. I am developing small ailments, a pain in my shoulder that will not go away, hearing that is declining, vision that is getting worse, and I find myself thinking more and more about the bottle. I find myself thinking about what it would be like to take the remedy. I find myself thinking about whether it would really work the way Maggie said it would work. I am telling you this not as a warning. I am telling you this as a confession. Because if I open that bottle, if I take that remedy, if I become something other than human, someone should know why. Someone should understand that I was not mad. I was not desperate in the way that desperation usually looks. I was simply tired, and I was afraid, and I was curious about what lay on the other side of the remedy. And I am telling you that the most frightening thing about Maggie's remedy is not what it does to the body. It is how much it calls to you after you have seen it, how much it whispers to you, how much it makes you want to believe that there is something better than human existence waiting for you. If you ever encounter a healer who offers you something that seems too powerful, something that heals too completely, something that makes you feel as if you are stepping outside of yourself, you should refuse. You should refuse even if you are sick. You should refuse even if you are dying. Because what seems like healing might be something else entirely. And if you are ever offered a remedy that seems to promise complete healing, you should know that nothing in this world offers complete healing. Something always takes a price. And sometimes that price is not your life. Sometimes that price is yourself. Story 5. Whistle Up the Dark. My name is David, and I learned a rule when I was 6 years old. Never whistle after dusk. My grandfather told me this rule. He told me it as seriously as he had told me any rule in my life. He did not tell me why. He simply told me never to whistle after dusk, and he told me that breaking that rule would bring something. I did not understand what would be brought. I did not understand why a simple action like whistling would be forbidden. But I understood that it was important. I understood that there was danger in it. For most of my childhood, I obeyed the rule. I was a child who obeyed rules. I was cautious. I was careful. I never whistled after dusk. And then I became a teenager. I became the kind of person who questioned rules. I became the kind of person who thought that rules were superstition. I became the kind of person who wanted to prove that the rules were wrong. On a night in October, when I was 16 years old, I deliberately broke the rule. I was sitting on the porch of my family's house. The sun had set about an hour before. The darkness was complete. The stars were coming out. I was alone on the porch. No one was watching me. I whistled. It was just a simple tune. a song that I liked. Nothing elaborate, nothing that seemed to have power. I simply whistled. The sound seemed to stop something. It seemed to stop the normal sounds of the night. The crickets that had been singing stopped. The wind that had been moving through the trees stopped. For a moment, there was complete silence, and then something whistled back. It was not a human whistle. It was a sound that was like a whistle, but it was also like something else. It was like wind through a narrow opening. It was like steam being released from something. It was like pain being drawn out in the form of sound. It came from the darkness, not from any specific direction, just from the darkness. I stopped whistling immediately. I went inside the house. I did not tell anyone what had happened. For the rest of the night, I heard whistling. It came from different places. Sometimes it came from outside the house. Sometimes it sounded like it was coming from inside the walls. Sometimes it came from the attic. Sometimes it came from the basement. But no matter where it came from, it was following the same pattern. It would whistle a note, then it would wait. Then it would whistle another note. It was as if something was learning my tune. It was as if something was copying my whistle, note by note, listening to the one I had created, and then reproducing it. By the morning, it had learned the entire tune. I never whistled again. For the next several years, I was cautious. I never whistled. I was very careful not to do it. I was aware that I had done something wrong, and I was paying a price for it. The whistling stopped after a few days. The thing that was learning my tune, whatever it was, it eventually left. I did not hear it anymore. I did not sense its presence anymore, but I remembered. I remembered the sound. I remembered the feeling of something learning something from me. I remembered the feeling of something coming closer, getting better at copying what I had done, getting better at being like me. Years passed. I grew up. I left the mountains. I went to college. I got a job in a city. I lived a normal life. I did not think about the rule. I did not think about whistling. I did not think about what I had done when I was 16 years old. And then I had to move back to the mountains. I was 32 years old. My mother had become ill. I came back to help care for her. I expected to stay for a few months. I ended up staying for years. During that time, I had to be careful. I had to be careful around the house. I had to be careful when I was outside, because the rule was still in effect. The rule was still true. Never whistle after dusk. But something had changed. The rule had expanded, or my breaking of the rule had consequences that continued to unfold. I began to notice that there were other people who were breaking the rule. Young children who did not know better. teenagers who thought the rule was superstition, just as I had thought. I would hear them whistling in the evening, and I would know what was going to happen to them. The whistling would come back for them. The thing would return. It would learn their tune. It would follow them for days or weeks, learning how to whistle exactly what they whistled. And then, sometimes, the people who had whistled would stop whistling. They would stop in the middle of a tune. They would go quiet. And I would wonder what had happened to them. Had the thing stopped playing? Or had the person been so thoroughly replaced by the thing's ability to copy them that the person was no longer there? There was a boy who lived 2 houses down from my family's house. He was 12 years old. He had a distinctive whistle, a very specific way of whistling a particular tune. I heard him whistling it in the evening. I heard him break the rule. 3 days later, I saw him on the street. He was whistling. He was whistling the exact same tune in the exact same way. I knew that it was not the same boy. The boy I knew could not have whistled that perfectly, could not have reproduced that level of precision. This was something else wearing the memory of his whistle. I watched him walk down the street. He was looking for something. He was looking for someone. He was looking for anyone who might hear him whistle. Anyone who might recognize something familiar in the sound. I did not warn anyone. I did not tell anyone what I was seeing. I simply watched. A few weeks later, the boy stopped appearing on the street. His parents did not talk about him. They did not seem to be looking for him. It was as if he had simply been absorbed into the normal flow of time. As I got older, as I spent more time back in the mountains, I began to understand what the rule was really protecting against. The rule was not protecting against a threat that came from outside. The rule was protecting against something that had always been here, something that lived in the dark places, something that learned by listening, something that got better at mimicking the sounds and gestures and ways of being of the people in these mountains. And I began to understand why my grandfather had been so serious about the rule. He had known what I had done before I did it. He had known that I was the kind of person who would break the rule. He had known that I would invite that thing in. And he had hoped that by being very clear about the rule, by being very serious about it, he could at least protect other people from making the same choice. I am 64 years old now. I have lived back in the mountains for 32 years, and I have never whistled, not once, not even unconsciously, not even to myself when I am alone, because I know what I brought back. I know what I invited in when I was a foolish 16-year-old, and I know that it is still here. It is still learning. It is still getting better at copying the sounds and the ways of the people in these mountains. And I know that one day It might get so good at copying that it will be indistinguishable from a human being. It might be so perfect in its mimicry that no one will be able to tell the difference. And then it will walk among us, and no one will know that the person they are talking to is not actually a person at all. If you ever find yourself in a place where you hear whistling after dusk, you should pay attention. You should listen very carefully to the whistling. You should try to hear whether it is the same as something you heard before, or whether it is something new. And you should understand that every time someone whistles after dark, every time the rule is broken, that thing gets a little better at being human, and eventually we will not be able to tell the difference. Story 6. Bones in the Canning Jars. My name is Patricia, and I am the person who discovered what my family had been keeping in the root cellar. I had not been back to my grandmother's house in 15 years. I had left the mountains when I was 18 years old. I had gone to the coast. I had built a life there. I had a job and a house and a family. I did not think about the mountains. I did not think about the people I had left behind. And then my grandmother died. I came back for the funeral. I stayed in her house for a few days afterward. My mother and my aunts were there, sorting through her things, deciding what to keep and what to give away. No one wanted to go down to the root cellar. No one wanted to deal with what was stored down there. My grandmother had been a woman of a certain era. She preserved food. She canned vegetables and fruits. She prepared things for the winter. The root cellar was full of jars. Jars of green beans. Jars of pickled vegetables. Jars of preserves and jellies. Jars of things that my grandmother had been storing for decades. My mother asked if I would sort through the cellar and decide what needed to be disposed of, what was still good and what had gone bad. She asked me to be thorough because much of it had been down there for many years. I agreed. I did not want to agree, but I felt obligated. It was what was asked of me. I went down to the root cellar in the morning. It was a cool, dark place. The stairs went down steep. The walls were stone, the original walls of the house. The air was damp and cool. The jars were everywhere, lining shelves from floor to ceiling. Some of them were dusty. Some of them had labels written in my grandmother's handwriting, with dates from the 1950s and 1960s. Some had no labels at all. I began to sort through them. I opened jars to check if the contents were still good. Most of them were fine, even the old ones. My grandmother had done a good job of preserving food. The mason jars had sealed properly. The contents were intact, but as I worked my way deeper into the cellar, I began to notice jars that were different. Jars that did not contain vegetables or fruits, or any kind of food. Jars that contained something else. At first, I did not understand what I was looking at. I thought perhaps my grandmother had been preserving biological specimens. There were jars that contained what looked like organs. Hearts, perhaps. Livers. Kidneys. Things that were preserved in a clear liquid that was not like any preserving liquid I had ever seen. The liquid seemed to have a quality that was almost metallic. It seemed to shimmer slightly in the light, but the organs did not look like the organs of a large animal. They were too small. They seemed almost human, except not quite. The proportions were wrong. The structure was subtly different. I opened one of the jars to look more closely. The smell that came out was indescribable. It was the smell of decay and chemicals and something else, something alive. I closed the jar immediately, and I did not open another one, but I began to understand what I was looking at. As I sorted through the rest of the jars, as I worked my way to the back of the cellar, I began to see more complex things. Jars that contained bones, small bones, finger bones perhaps, teeth, skulls that were too small to be human, but not quite animal. Things that looked almost human, but not quite. And each jar had a label, my grandmother's handwriting, a date and a name. The names were not women's names and not men's names. The names were incomplete, half names, broken names. Names that seemed to have been created by someone who did not fully understand how names worked. I found a jar that contained a complete skeleton of something. It was about the size of a human fetus, or perhaps the size of an infant. But the bones were not the bones of a human. They were too delicate. They were constructed differently. The spine was curved wrong. The rib cage was asymmetrical, and the label on that jar read, Margaret, 1976. That was my name. My grandmother had named me Margaret. I was born in 1976. I put that jar down very carefully. I sat on the step at the edge of the cellar, and I did not move for a long time. When I finally went back upstairs, I found my mother in the kitchen. I asked her about the jars. I asked her what they contained. I asked her who Margaret was. My mother's face went very white. She told me to forget about the cellar. She told me never to speak about what I had seen. She told me that it was not my business. I did not accept this answer. I was an adult. I was entitled to know what my grandmother had been keeping in her root cellar. I pressed my mother for answers. She finally told me. She told me that my grandmother had been pregnant many times, more times than she had ever told anyone, more times than my grandfather knew about. My mother said that the pregnancies were not normal. The pregnancies resulted in things that were not human. things that had to be dealt with, things that had to be disposed of. My mother said that my grandmother had preserved them. She had preserved them in jars. She had kept them in the root cellar. No one had known about it except for my mother and my aunts. I asked my mother what I had been. I asked her if I was something that should have been preserved in a jar. She told me that I was a late pregnancy, a surprise. My grandmother had been told by doctors that she could not have more children. And then I came along, and I was normal. I was human. I had 10 fingers and 10 toes, and I was a normal human baby. My grandmother had been relieved. She had kept me. I asked her what the others had been. The things in the jars. The things that were not quite human. My mother would not tell me. She said that it was not something that anyone needed to understand. She said that my grandmother had done what was necessary. She said that the world was better served if those things did not exist. I never went back to the cellar. I left the next day. I drove back to the coast. I did not return for my grandmother's funeral. I did not return for many years, and I did not have children. I did not want to have children. I was terrified that I might carry something in my blood, something that might result in something like what my grandmother had been preserving. I was terrified that the line might continue in me. When I finally did return to the mountains, years later, I learned that my mother and aunts had gone back to the house after I left. They had gone to the cellar. They had removed all the jars. They had destroyed them. Everything had been disposed of. There was no evidence left of what my grandmother had been keeping, but they did not destroy everything. My mother kept one jar. She kept it hidden away. She never told me about it, but I found it years later when she was dying. I found it in her closet behind some old clothes. It was a jar labeled Margaret, 1976, and it contained something small, something preserved in that same metallic liquid, something that looked almost human. Almost. I have never looked at it closely. I have never opened the jar. I have simply kept it. I have kept it the way my grandmother kept her jars, the way my mother kept her jar. I have kept it as a burden, as a responsibility, as a secret that I cannot share with anyone, and I have never had children. I have lived my whole life in fear that if I had a child, if I passed on whatever was in my blood, if I created something that was similar to what my grandmother created, I would have to do what my grandmother did. I would have to preserve it. I would have to keep it secret. I would have to bear the weight of it. I am 87 years old now. I will not live much longer, and I do not know what will happen to the jar when I am gone. I do not know if someone will find it and understand what it is. I do not know if someone will destroy it and free me from the responsibility of it. But I know that somewhere in my family's history, something went wrong. Something changed. Something happened that resulted in my grandmother creating things that were not quite human. Something happened that made her feel the need to preserve them, to keep them in the dark, to hide them away. And I know that I am part of that history, whether I want to be or not, whether it was visible in me or not. I am connected to it. I am responsible for it in some way. If you ever find something in an old house that was meant to be hidden, if you ever discover something that someone has tried to preserve and conceal, you should understand that there is a reason for the preservation. There is a reason for the concealment. And you should decide before you learn what that reason is, whether you really want to know, because some knowledge is a burden that cannot be put down. Story 7: The Wampus Cat of Widow's Creek. My name is Samuel, and I am a man who has seen something that I should not have seen. The fire happened on a night in December. A structure that had been used for storage, for keeping things that the community wanted to keep safe, burned down. It burned completely. Nothing could be saved. By the time the fire was discovered, the structure was already lost. I was there that night. I was near the fire when it started. I had been out walking in the dark, thinking about things that were troubling me. I was 34 years old at the time. I was thinking about the direction my life was going. I was thinking about the choices I had made. I was near the structure when I smelled the smoke. I was there when the first flames appeared. I was there when I realized that something was burning. I should have raised an alarm. I should have run for help. I should have done something to prevent the burning or to save what was inside. But I did not. I stood and watched. I stood and watched as the structure burned. And in the midst of the fire, in the midst of the smoke and the flames, I saw something that should not exist. There was something inside the burning structure. Something that was moving through the flames. Something that was not being burned by the fire. Something that was taking things out of the burning building and carrying them away into the darkness. It was shaped like nothing I had ever seen. It had the general shape of a woman, but wrong. The proportions were wrong. The joints bent at angles that human joints should not bend. The face was almost human, but not quite. The eyes were too large. The mouth was too wide, and it had fur or feathers, or something in between. It was covered in something that was not skin. I have spent the rest of my life trying to find the words to describe what I saw. I have never found adequate words. I have simply called it the Wampus Cat, because that is what people call it. That is what the old stories call it. A creature that is half woman and half-beast, a creature that appears at times of great change, a creature that feeds on what burns. The Wampus cat moved through the fire without fear, without pain, without regard for the flames. It pulled things out of the structure and carried them away. It did this methodically, efficiently, as if it was performing a task that it had performed many times before. After the structure had burned completely, after there was nothing left but ash and smoking wood, the Wampus cat stopped. It turned to look toward me. It looked directly at me, though I was standing in the darkness. Though I should have been invisible, it did not move toward me. It simply looked at me, and I felt something shift inside my mind. I felt something looking at me from inside the creature's head. Something intelligent, something aware, something that was taking my measurement. Then it turned and it walked away, moving on 4 legs, moving in a way that was both feline and human. It moved into the darkness, and it did not return. The community did not understand how the fire had started. There was an investigation. There was talk of sabotage. There was talk of an accident, but there was no evidence of either. The fire simply seemed to have started on its own. I did not tell anyone what I had seen. I did not tell anyone about the Wampus cat. I simply let the story become what the community wanted it to be. But the Wampus cat did not leave. It remained in the area around Widow's Creek. It was seen by others. There were sightings, glimpses in the darkness, trails of something large moving through the forest. People came up with explanations. Mountain lion, bear, wild dog. But none of these explanations satisfied the people who saw it, because the Wampus cat was not quite any of those things. The Wampus cat was something in between, something that existed on the boundary between human and animal, and more buildings burned. After the first fire, there was a second fire. A barn this time. The structure burned completely. Again, nothing could be saved. And again, I caught sight of the Wampus cat moving through the flames, taking things out of the burning building, carrying them away. A third fire came. This time it was a house. The family escaped. No one was killed, but the house burned completely, and the Wampus cat was there, moving through the flames, doing its work. People began to understand that the fires were not random. They were not accidents. Something was setting them deliberately. Something was burning specific buildings. Something was taking things from those buildings. There was panic. There were patrols. There were guns brought out. There were searches through the forest around Widow's Creek. But the Wampus cat could not be killed. The patrols would see it, and they would shoot. But the bullets seemed to pass through it. Or perhaps they simply did not hurt it. The Wampus cat moved as if the bullets were nothing. Finally, the community realized something. The buildings that were burning were not random. The buildings had been chosen. They were the buildings that contained things that the community wanted to hide. Things that the community wanted to keep secret. The first building had contained records, documents that detailed certain practices, certain arrangements that the community had made, things that existed in the margins of the community's official story. The second building had been a storage area. It contained items that were not meant to be examined, items that represented agreements that were not meant to be spoken aloud. The third building was a house where something lived that was not welcome in the larger community, something that was kept hidden, something that was cared for quietly. The Wampus cat was burning away the evidence. The Wampus cat was destroying the hidden things. The Wampus cat was cleansing the community of its secrets. I began to understand what I had witnessed. I began to understand that the Wampus cat was not an act of random violence. The Wampus cat was an act of purification. The Wampus cat was a response to something, a correction, a punishment for what I did not know. No more fires came after that third building. The Wampus cat seemed to be satisfied. The community seemed to understand that there were no more secrets that needed burning. Or perhaps the community simply learned to be more careful about what it kept and where it kept it. But the Wampus cat remained. I would see it sometimes in the forest. I would catch sight of it at the edge of the darkness. I would sense it watching. I would sense it waiting. And I have come to believe that the Wampus cat was not a punishment for the community. The Wampus cat was a punishment for me. The Wampus cat was there because I had stood and watched the first fire, because I had not tried to stop it, because I had allowed it to happen, because I had wanted it to happen. The Wampus cat knows what I did. The Wampus cat knows what I failed to do, and it is waiting. It is watching. It is waiting to see if I will burn away my own secrets, or if I will require the Wampus cat to burn them away for me. I am 67 years old now. I have lived my whole life since that night under the gaze of the Wampus cat. I have lived my whole life knowing that there is a creature that is keeping track of what I hide, what I conceal, what I fail to confess, and I am waiting. I am waiting to see if I will be judged. I am waiting to see if my secrets will burn. If you ever see the Wampus cat, if you ever catch sight of that half-human, half-beast form moving through the darkness, you should understand something. It is not hunting you. It is not attacking you. It is simply moving through the world, burning away the things that should not exist. And if it does not target you, if it does not burn your secrets, then you should be very grateful, because you should be much worse. Story 8. Down in the mouth of Copperhead Hollow. My name is Robert, and I was born in a mining town in Copperhead Hollow. The town no longer exists. It ceased to exist in 1927, but I was born there. I lived there for the first 6 years of my life. My father was a coal miner. His father was a coal miner. His father before him was a coal miner. Coal mining was what the men in my family did. It was what we knew. The mines in Copperhead Hollow were deep, the deepest in the county. The tunnels extended far underground. Some of the tunnels were very old. They had been dug decades before, and the miners knew from the earliest days of mining in that location that the tunnels were connected to something. The miners knew that some of the tunnels did not lead up and out of the earth. Some of the tunnels led deeper. Some of the tunnels led somewhere else. There were rules. Miners were forbidden from following certain passages. Miners were forbidden from digging in certain directions. Miners were forbidden from exploring the tunnels that seemed to lead downward into darkness. My father knew these rules. All the miners knew these rules, and all the miners understood that the rules were there for a reason. But there was a man named Samuel who did not respect the rules. Samuel was a miner like my father. Samuel was strong, and he was fearless. Samuel did not believe in the restrictions that the mining company had placed on the tunnels. Samuel believed that the tunnels led to more coal. Samuel believed that the restrictions were superstition. One day, Samuel convinced a group of miners to explore one of the forbidden passages. They went into the earth. They had lamps and picks, and they were going to map the tunnel system. They were going to prove that there was nothing to fear. They were gone for a very long time. The other miners waited for them at the entrance to the tunnel. Hours passed. The men did not return. Finally, one of them came back. Just one. His name was Thomas. He was covered in a substance that was not coal dust. It was something else, something that looked like it might be mineral, might be crystal, might be something that belonged to no category that anyone could name. Thomas did not speak coherently. He spoke in fragments. He spoke about caverns. Caverns that were vast. Caverns that seemed to have no bottom. Caverns where the walls glowed with a light that was not reflected light. A light that came from inside the stone itself. Thomas spoke about structures in those caverns. Structures that had not been built by humans. Structures that were geometric and perfect and too large to comprehend. Thomas spoke about the other miners. He said that they were still down there. He said that they were doing something. He said that they did not want to come back. Thomas was taken to the hospital in the nearest town. He was examined by doctors. The doctors said that he was suffering from some kind of shock, some kind of mental break. They said that he would recover in time, but Thomas did not recover. Thomas remained in the hospital for the rest of his life, speaking in fragments about caverns and light and structures that glowed in the darkness. He died in 1952, never having fully returned to himself. The mines in Copperhead Hollow were investigated. The mining company brought in officials. They descended into the tunnels. They followed the path that Samuel and the others had followed. No other caverns were found. No structures were discovered. The miners must have gotten lost, the officials concluded. They must have descended into passages that led nowhere. They must have become trapped. But the miners were never found. No bodies were discovered. No trace of Samuel or the others was ever recovered. The mining company decided to close down the mines in Copperhead Hollow. They decided that the mines were too dangerous. They sealed the main entrances. They abandoned the operation. The town emptied out. Miners left to find work elsewhere. Families moved away. By 1927, the town was essentially abandoned. My family left when I was 6 years old. My father found work in a different mine, in a different town. I do not have clear memories of Copperhead Hollow. I have mostly forgotten it, but I remember one thing. I remember going into the mines with my father one day. I was very young. I was not supposed to be down there, but my father brought me to show me what he did, to show me the work of the miners. I remember the darkness. I remember the way the darkness seemed to have weight and substance. I remember the echoes of the picks hitting the stone. I remember the sound of the water running through the tunnels, deeper and deeper down. And I remember that we came to a place where the tunnel opened up into something larger. A chamber. A space that seemed to extend down far beyond where the lamplight could reach. My father told me that we should turn back. My father told me that we should not go any further. But I heard something. I heard a sound coming from that darkness below. It was a sound like wind, but also like something else. It was a sound like something breathing. Something very large breathing in the deep places below the earth. My father grabbed me and he pulled me back to the surface. He did not take me into the mines again. When I was grown, I tried to return to Copperhead Hollow. I wanted to see what had become of the town. I wanted to see if the mines still existed. I found the location, but the town was completely gone. There were only foundations remaining. houses had been torn down or had simply fallen apart. The mining equipment had been removed, but the mines were still there. The entrances were sealed, but I could see where they were. I could see the place where humans had dug down into the earth. I wanted to open up one of the sealed entrances. I wanted to descend into the mines. I wanted to understand what my father had seen that day. I wanted to understand what had frightened him so much that he had pulled me away from it. But I did not do it. Something stopped me. Some sense of preserving my own safety. Some understanding that what was down there in the darkness was not meant to be discovered by people like me. I have lived my whole life since, always aware of what is beneath. Always aware that beneath the surface of the earth, in places that humans have tried to reach, there are things that do not belong to our world. Things that exist in the deep places. Things that breathe and move and wait. The mining in other areas has continued. Mines have been dug in other places. And sometimes, when the tunnels go deep enough, miners find evidence of something else. They find evidence of older tunnels. Tunnels that were not dug by humans. Tunnels that lead to caverns that should not exist. Tunnels that lead to structures that should not be there. The rules are still in place. The forbidden passages are still forbidden. The miners understand that there are places that humans should not go. Places that humans should not reach. But the temptation is always there. The temptation to dig deeper, to go further, to see what is really down there in the darkness. And I understand why Samuel and the other miners went into those passages. I understand why they did not come back. Because once you have heard the breathing of something that lives beneath the earth, once you have felt the presence of something so vast that it exists beyond the reach of human comprehension, you cannot simply forget about it. You will spend the rest of your life wanting to go back. You will spend the rest of your life wanting to understand. You will spend the rest of your life hearing that breathing in your sleep. If you ever work in a place where tunnels are being dug, if you ever descend into the earth, you should understand something. There are boundaries. There are places that humans are not meant to reach. And if you see signs of older tunnels, if you see evidence of structures that predated your own work, if you see the walls beginning to glow with a light that does not come from your lamp, you should turn back immediately, because what is down there is not your concern. What is down there does not care about you. And if you go far enough down, if you go deep enough into the earth, you might find yourself in a place where the choice to return is no longer your own. Story 9. Till the bloodroot blooms again. My name is Aliner, and I am speaking to you now because a debt has been collected from my family. A debt that was made long before I was born. A debt that I am the latest member of my family to pay. My family has lived in these mountains for 324 years. We came here early. We helped settle the land. We built communities. We established ourselves as one of the founding families in this region. But something went wrong in the early days. Something happened that required a bargain. Some of my ancestors encountered something in the deep forest. Something that should not exist. Something that existed on the boundary between human and inhuman. And rather than flee, rather than try to protect themselves through force, my ancestors made a deal. The details of the bargain are unclear. The documents that recorded it are lost. The oldest entries in the family Bible are not specific about what was promised. But the result is this. Every 17 years, on the summer solstice, when I turn a certain age, I am claimed. I am taken. I am brought to a place in the deep forest where the bloodroot grows. The bloodroot is a plant that is found only in certain places in these mountains. It is a small plant with a red root. The root is the color of blood. The plant has a particular significance in the folklore of these mountains. The bloodroot is associated with ancient bargains, with sacrifices, with prices paid. I was born on June 20th. I will turn 17 on the summer solstice. On the solstice, when I was 17, I was taken to the forest. I did not go willingly. I was taken while I slept. I woke in a place deep in the forest, surrounded by trees that I did not recognize, in a place that seemed to exist outside of the normal geography of the mountains. There was a figure waiting for me, a figure that was shaped like a woman, but the proportions were wrong. The figure was very tall. The face was hidden behind a mask of leaves and vines. The figure did not speak. It simply took my hand and led me deeper into the forest. We came to a clearing where the bloodroot grew. Thousands of them. Hundreds of thousands of them. The entire floor of the clearing was covered with the small red-rooted plants. The roots were all exposed. The roots were all visible, as if someone had carefully arranged the plants so that the red roots could be seen. The figure took a knife. The knife was made of stone or bone. It was old. It was very old. The figure cut open my palm. My blood fell onto the bloodroot, and as the blood touched the plants, they began to grow. They grew rapidly. They grew in response to my blood. They grew until they were as tall as trees. They grew until they filled the clearing with red flowers and red-stained stems and red-soaked roots, and I felt something leave me. I felt something essential pass out of my body and into the earth. Something that was not blood. Something that was not flesh. Something that existed on a level that I do not have words for. When the sun rose, I was back in my bed. It was the morning after the solstice. No one had missed me. It was as if I had simply slept and nothing had happened. But I knew that something had changed. I knew that something had been taken from me. I did not die. I did not become ill. But I changed. I became less. Something that had been inside me was no longer there. Some capacity for feeling, perhaps. Some ability to experience certain emotions. Some essential part of what made me human. And I knew that in 17 years, when I turned 34, it would happen again. The years passed. I grew up. I had a normal life, as much as one can have a normal life with the knowledge of what was coming. I went to school. I got a job. I fell in love, if what I felt could be called love, given what had been taken from me. When I was 34, I was taken again. I was older this time. I was aware. I was not asleep when it happened. I felt it. I felt the figure come for me. I felt myself being drawn away into the forest. I felt the fear, or what remained of my capacity for fear after 17 years of diminishment. The clearing was different this time. The bloodroot had grown even more extensively. It covered an area that was vast. The plants were larger, older. The flowers were the color of fresh blood. And this time, more was taken. More of what made me human. More of my capacity to feel joy or sorrow, or any emotion beyond the most basic sensation. I realized then what the bargain was. I realized what my family had agreed to all those centuries ago. The bargain was this. In exchange for the ability to live in these mountains, in exchange for prosperity and safety, each member of my family line would be drawn away at certain ages. Each member would be brought to the bloodroot, and each member would be diminished, would lose something essential, would become less human with each passing. And I realized that I would be drawn away again. At 51, at 68, at 85 if I lived that long. Each time I would lose more. Each time I would become less. I am 83 years old. I have been taken 5 times. 5 times I have been brought to the forest. 5 times something essential has been removed from me. I have almost nothing left. I am barely human now. I exist in a state that is between life and death, between presence and absence, between being and not being. And I know that when I am 100, if I live that long, I will be taken again. And this time, I do not believe I will come back. I do not believe that what is left will be enough to sustain a human life. I tell you this not as a warning. There is no way to avoid the bargain my family made. The bargain transcends individuals. It is tied to the land. It is tied to the bloodroot. It is tied to something that exists beneath the surface of these mountains and will continue to exist long after my family is gone. I tell you this so that you understand the true cost of living in these mountains. The cost is not paid in money or effort or even blood. The cost is paid in humanity. The cost is that something essential is removed from you, something that makes you capable of being fully human. And I tell you so that you understand that the bloodroot that grows in certain places in these mountains is not a plant. It is a door through which the essential parts of human beings are drawn, a door through which our capacity for feeling and joy and love are fed to something that lives beneath the earth. If you ever see the bloodroot growing, if you ever see the small red-rooted plant appearing in a place where it should not exist, you should understand that a bargain has been made there. A bargain has been made with something ancient, and that place is no longer a place where humans can live freely. It is a place where the debt is being collected. Story 10. The Singing at Crookneck Pass. My name is William, and I have spent my entire life trying to understand what I heard on Crookneck Pass. I have spent decades searching for an explanation, and I have concluded that there is no explanation. There is only the sound, and the sound is enough. Crookneck Pass is a mountain road that winds through a particularly desolate part of the range. It is not a major road. Few people travel it. The road is narrow. The curves are sharp. The drops are steep. On a clear day, you can see for miles. On a foggy day, you cannot see past the hood of your car. When I was 22 years old, I was driving through Crookneck Pass late one night. I was coming from the town on the other side of the mountains. I was driving back to my home. The road was difficult to navigate in the dark. I was driving slowly, carefully, watching the curve of the road, and I heard it. It was a voice, a human voice, a woman's voice. It was singing. The voice was coming from somewhere outside the car. The voice was singing a hymn, a religious song, a song about grace and redemption and salvation. I pulled the car over. I turned off the engine, and I listened. The voice continued. It was beautiful. It was the most beautiful voice I had ever heard. It was old-fashioned. It had an accent that matched the mountains around me. It was singing the hymn with a kind of perfect purity, perfect emotion, perfect sincerity. And there was no congregation. There was no church. There was no person visible anywhere on that dark road. There was only the voice, singing alone in the darkness. I started the car again. I drove forward, and the voice followed me. The voice continued singing the same hymn. The voice maintained its perfect tone and perfect emotion. I wanted to stop. I wanted to stop the car and get out and try to find the source of the voice. I wanted to walk into the darkness and find the person who was singing. I wanted to hear that voice more clearly. I wanted to understand where it was coming from, but I did not stop. Something prevented me from stopping. Some sense of self-preservation. Some understanding that stopping would be dangerous. I drove faster. I drove out of Crookneck Pass. The voice continued singing. The voice followed me. The voice did not diminish in volume. It did not fade. It simply continued singing the hymn with perfect beauty. When I reached the edge of Crookneck Pass, when I left the narrow mountain road and entered the area where civilization resumed, the voice stopped. The hymn ended. There was silence. I drove to a police station. I made a report. I told them that there was someone stranded on Crookneck Pass. Someone who was singing for help. Someone who needed assistance. The police went to investigate. They found nothing. They found no person. They found no sign of anyone on the road. They returned, and they told me that I had imagined it. That perhaps the wind had sounded like voices. That perhaps my fear on the narrow road had triggered some kind of psychological response. But I knew what I had heard. I knew that it was not the wind. It was not imagination. It was a voice, a human voice, a woman's voice singing a hymn. In the years since, I have talked to other people who have driven through Crookneck Pass. I have discovered that others have heard it too. Others have heard the singing. Others have heard the voice continuing the hymn in the darkness, and they all report the same thing. They all hear the voice singing perfectly. They all feel the urge to stop and find the source of the voice. And they all refrain from stopping because of some instinct, some understanding that stopping would be dangerous. Some people have not refrained. Some people have stopped their cars on Crookneck Pass and gotten out to search for the voice. Some of those people have been found. They have been found unconscious or confused or unable to speak coherently about what they experienced. They speak about walking in the darkness. They speak about following the voice. They speak about finding a woman singing in the darkness. But they never speak clearly about what happened after that. They speak in fragments and confusion. And some people have not been found at all. Some people have simply disappeared on Crookneck Pass. Their cars have been found parked on the side of the road, but the people have vanished. The people have disappeared into the darkness, presumably to follow the voice, to find the source of the hymn, to understand what is singing in the darkness. I have tried to research the hymn. I have tried to find out what song is being sung. From the descriptions of people who have heard it, I have narrowed it down to a few possibilities. It seems to be some kind of old hymn. A hymn from the 19th century. A hymn about grace and redemption. And I have discovered that there was a woman who died on Crookneck Pass. This happened more than 100 years ago. The woman was traveling to a church to sing at a service. She was known as a very gifted singer. Her voice was extraordinary. People traveled to hear her sing. Her name was not recorded. Her death was not recorded in any official capacity. But there is a story. There is a legend. The legend says that she was killed on Crookneck Pass. Killed by someone who did not want her to reach the church. Killed by someone who wanted to prevent her from singing the hymn. And the legend says that her voice remains on that road. The legend says that she continues to sing the hymn that she was never able to sing at the church. The legend says that she will continue to sing until someone finally stops to listen. Until someone finally follows her voice to the end. I do not know if this legend is true. I do not know the name of the woman. I do not know who killed her or why. I do not know the complete story, but I know that the singing is real. I know that something is singing on Crookneck Pass. I know that the voice is beautiful and that it is calling to people in the darkness, and I know that I will hear it again someday. I know that if I drive through Crookneck Pass again at night, I will hear the voice. The voice will be singing the same hymn. The voice will be as beautiful as it was the first time I heard it. And I know that someday I may not drive away. Someday I may stop. Someday I may get out of the car and walk into the darkness to find the source of the voice. Someday, I may find what has been singing alone on Crookneck Pass for more than 100 years. And I know that when I do, I will finally understand what the voice is asking of me. I will finally understand why it continues to sing. I will finally understand the story that has never been fully told. But until that day comes, I will keep driving through Crookneck Pass with my windows closed and my doors locked, listening to the voice sing in the darkness, fighting the urge to stop. And I will warn anyone who hears the singing. I will tell them that the voice is not asking for help. The voice is asking for company. The voice is asking for someone to stay. The voice is asking for someone to follow. And if you are ever on Crookneck Pass and you hear the hymn, you should drive. You should drive faster. You should not stop. You should not listen to the voice, because the voice has been singing for a very long time, and it is still waiting for someone to answer its call. That concludes the testimony of the 10. 10 stories, 10 warnings, 10 lessons paid for in blood and loss and diminishment. We tell these stories because they must be told. Because there are places in these mountains where the normal rules do not apply. Because there are things older than us waiting in the darkness. Listen to these stories. Remember them. share them, pass them on, because the only protection against the darkness is knowledge. The only defense against the things that live in these mountains is understanding. And we are telling you so that you might understand. We are telling you so that you will not make the same mistakes. We are telling you so that you will respect the warnings. We are telling you so that you will survive. When you leave these mountains, carry these stories with you. Remember that there are places where civilization has not reached. There are places where humanity has not fully established itself. There are places where the old things remain, and those places demand respect. Those places demand caution. Those places demand that you follow the rules, even when you do not understand why those rules exist. Because the rules exist for a reason. The rules exist because someone has paid the price for learning them. Someone has suffered. Someone has lost something. Someone has paid so that you might know. Respect the rules. Remember the stories. And above all, understand that these mountains are not a place where you can do whatever you want. These mountains have laws older than human law. These mountains have rules that predate human civilization. And these mountains enforce those rules with a precision and a purpose that has survived centuries. We have told you the truth. What you do with that